So I'm going to show you guys this. And of course, you know, the other day, I think when I was last with you guys on Friday, we reported this whole thing. You know, Greg Lunt did the breaking news in regards to it, kind of like what you see right here. After 2 years of work and deliberation, Secure Asset Transfer Protocol is now an official working group with the IETF. Now, if you're wondering about the IETF, why do they matter, right? The Internet Engineering Task Force makes the internet work better. You may be thinking, no big deal. It is a big deal. Let me show you why it's such a big deal. So here's the particular site. And they've been doing this, right, for a while now, all right? So we're talking literally since the 80s. Listen to this, guys. I want to show you this real quick before we have our conversation about this. So if you're wondering about this, this is not some Joe Schmo, run-of-the-mill, insignificant thing. You know, when I did more of my own research and dug into it, look at this. Internet Engineering Task Force, founded in 1986. We're talking about the very, very early days. If any of you guys used the internet back in the early days, you remember specifically news groups, IRC, things like that, right? And of course, we evolved from there. So they are the premier standards development organization, SDO, for the internet. Just to give you a little brief thing right here, the mission of them is, for instance, the overall goal is to make the internet work better, produce higher quality, relevant technical and engineering documents to influence the way people design, use, and manage the internet in a way to make the internet work better, right? Think about where we're at with Web 3, where we jump from Web 2 to Web 3. There's, of course, participation in regards to this, but they try to keep things fair. And if anything, they recognize Quant because of interoperability. And that is a key thing I want to draw to you guys' attention. Before we kick it into this particular conversation, I want to show you guys just a tad bit more in regards to some updates. So Gilbert Verdian the other day weighed in on SATP achieving IETF working group status. Now, if you wonder about SATP specifically, that stands for Secure Asset Transfer Protocol. They are a charter working group, and their objective, like you see right here, is look at the key thing. Interoperability problem. To solve the interoperability problem in many digital asset networks, frequently shortened to network simplicity. Here's one of the other goals. Working group to develop a standard program which operates between two peer gateways for the purpose of transferring digital assets between originator and the origin network to a beneficiary in destination network. They realize the problems in the space and how we evolve. Eventually, we'll go from Web 3 to Web 4. So with that said, I know this was kind of a lot to throw at Sean, but Sean is also invested in the likes of Quant. What did you gather in regards to this? And do you feel as this is significant as I think it is when it comes to these things with APIs? Because to me, APIs is huge. That's what stands out for Quant.
So Quant, you say, I've never heard of it. Don't know what it is. No. So yeah, I'm definitely into Quant. And so what I want to say about this, obviously, you know, the SATP is going from, what is it? Network to network, or gateway to gateway, right? Not necessarily wallet to wallet. So it's not end to end or peer to peer, but it's going to interconnect just like the SATP is going to do the same thing Quant does, the same thing. There's a couple other programs out there or projects out there that do the same thing, but the important part here is the interoperability. And some people think, okay, interoperability, that sounds cool, but why is it so important, right? You have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of financial institutions, banks, companies in general, different payment gateways that don't have their own crypto. They don't have their own program built. They don't have the resources or the time at this point to create, right, their own program to help move digital, you know, assets around. So interoperability, that's why it's so important. When you have something so, I don't want to say basic, because obviously it's not basic, but just the fact that you can plug and play APIs from software to software in two completely different industries and have it link and work, right? So these companies are going to be able to go in and just use Quant and say, hey, I want to use your network or your software, plug in here, send money over to, you know, some other business, you know, overseas, and just have it work, right? And that's the SATP is doing the same thing. It's taking, unlike businesses, let's say, and basically linking them together with APIs, which is super cool, right? And that's why it's really important that these things are coming out right now.
Yeah, it really is. I'm glad you were able to explain some of that. One of the other things I'm going to present to you guys a little bit more in regards to some of these things with the SATP in conjunction with IETF and so on. So there's a little bit more in regards to this, and I'm going to present this in a way you can see it visually on your screen. So it's this right here, basically, and it has a complete breakdown in regards to all this. So just to kind of give you the gist of this was published just roughly a few days ago, 2 days ago to be exact. But Gilbert Verdian went into detail in regards to this, because here's the thing. I personally just think this is absolutely like groundbreaking, like it says right here. So he published, as in Gilbert Verdian, a full thread with the origin story and future impact of this specific protocol, right? So here's a little bit about this. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So he states, as in Gilbert, he was very pleased to hear the official approval of the SATP working group with the IETF. This has been a tremendous effort over the last 2 years. This is not something in which, we just got this going like a few months ago. No, it's been a long developing thing. Now, we, of course, outlined many times here at Crypto Talk now this whole breakdown and, what they've done with Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, right? So it says it has been a tremendous effort for the last 2 years working with Thomas Harjano from MIT, Connection Science, Martin Hargreaves, which is, of course, part of the Quant team, and Wes Hardacre. I'm going to blow this up. So when you have this kind of blast from the past, it mentions that, there was this particular announcement, but it says, just in case you haven't seen it, the SATP and WG is officially open and running. It's now time to buckle down and deliver what they promised in the charter. Thank you to everyone, for instance, that put such effort into this and so on. It's actually a pretty big deal. And the reason why it's such a big deal is because you already understand, for instance, the payment APIs, some of these other things, right? Banking APIs, anything related to APIs, Quant really, really stands out. Now, another thing I want to point out is this. It says some of these colleagues came from Intel, IBM, EY News, et cetera, et cetera. This working group, also co-chaired by Quant's network, very own Claire Facer, or Focher, I should say, the journey to IETF starting in early 2003, 20 years ago. So for people that want to flood Quant, and I've seen it in regards to our recorded content, there's people saying, oh, this is not that big of a deal. It's never going to get to a four or even 5-digit, coin/token. You see some of these things and you say to yourself, how can you not see this? So over 20 years, right, this has been going on with this particular journey and so on. And when you think about the IETF, it dates all the way back to the 80s. So I wanted to point that out. But another thing I want to point out is the private and public sector. Look at this. Gilbert Verdian was concerned about the security and underlying internet protocols we rely on daily. We just didn't build an effective security at the core and since had to implement multiple security workarounds to manage this. When they talk about secure smart contracts, right? It's not just a smart contract, it's a secure smart contract. Look at this, just a little bit more in regards to this. Since the late 90s, Gilbert was looking at how to better secure the internet. I mean, we're talking about the literally you think about the Matrix, right? It's like you had, I hate to use this term, the Oracle, but it's like, Gilbert Verdian and these guys were literally, working on developing the internet. And then, for instance, they created the ISO standard. Don't believe me? Look into ISO TC 307. The founding stages of that was back in 2014, where we're at now. But look at this. He was looking to better secure the internet, create an alternative secure zone as an overlay that can handle transactions that inherently need more security. The way forward was to create a protocol that can route and secure these types of transactions. I want to get a little bit of what you think in regards to some of this. I mean, am I too far off base? Or is there a lot of significance to have an understanding that these guys are literally, have worked with the pioneers of the internet to make things better going forward.
Well, anytime you're going to have somebody who's at the forefront, right? I mean, since the 90s, right? I mean, the internet was barely around, and they were there at the very beginning, thinking about safety, right? And that's, something that we're always going to have to consider, right? When we have anything, we're moving information, across the world, having somebody have access to it, or your identity, or however that is, which is why we're going to have, these safe and secure smart contracts and NFTs and identities, and I'm sure we'll discuss these in the future. But for as far as SATP, I mean, that he kind of broke it down, and I was just reading the Twitter thread while you were talking about it there, and made it kind of easy, bite size, able to understand. SATP solves following, right? This is very basic discovery. Okay, first the connecting DLT, which digital ledger technology networks, permissioned or permissionless, they'll discover and identify each other, right? First thing, routing protocol allows the gateway to gateway interconnectivity and routing to standardized handshakes to establish communication, and then establishing transactions across the network in a secure manner with the appropriate controls, integrity, and access checks. So that's kind of breaking it down right there. And security obviously being, one of the main issues that we have to deal with going forward, as you were just talking about there. But the amount of effort that Quant and Gilbert and his team have put in over the last decades is probably incalculable to the crypto space.
Yeah, it really, really is. I didn't realize that we have covered quite a bit of this already. We're not even done scratching the surface in regards to that. We got down to this particular point for the transactions. I want to give a little highlight for this because a lot of people say, Quant doesn't really do anything in regards to that. It's just hear me out. So yeah, transactions. So the main methods to creating a protocol are create a product which is widely used, which then becomes the adopted standard for that particular use case, right? For example, remember Napster back in the turn of the century or the new millennium, right? Yeah, Metallica went after him and so on, but that was an example for P2P, peer-to-peer. Create a protocol openly with no restrictions and embedded in systems which are used, right? But when you think about what he's mentioning here, right, creating an adopted standard, right? Come on, ISO, right? Literally, he wrote the ISO standard. That is so significant. A little bit more in regards to this. 6, widely, for instance, Telnet, Unix, TCP/IP in the early 80s, right? I remember, some of the first online games I ever played was TCP/IP, right? So that peer-to-peer, right? We didn't have necessarily, go from the step of having like dedicated servers located at actual data centers, so we have a good connection, right? It's just strictly peer-to-peer. But yeah, look at what is mentioned here, right? The collaboration of RFCs, SMTP, right? These particular protocols, right? Like you don't even think about HTTP, so on and so forth. There's a good example of adoption of protocols and standards when you look at OCI and TCP. Again, understand the particular Quant connection. Here's a little bit more in regards to this, right? This is a really good outline because it pounds home why this is so significant in regards to Quant's connection with this whole thing of APIs. So it says, where an open protocol was easier to access, simpler to implement, and widely adopted, started in the US DoD in 1983 with World's TCP/IP Day. He decided the best option was to create a protocol through industry collaboration, and 20 years later, the IETF was at the right place and approach. So, I mean, again, when we state that, this whole thing with IETF, they're not just something that just popped up a few months ago or a few years ago. They've literally been doing it since the beginning. I mean, I know some people are going to state, well, the very, very beginning of the internet is, the Russians' ARPANET. That's debatable. I'm talking about as far as what we know and so on. But look at this further. This particular point. The blockchain ISO standard. Why is that so important? Why is that so significant? Well, we have a little bit of a breakdown. So we're getting into the whole thing about SATP. But like he says, what is it, in reality, what does it mean? It says, we are on a journey and transformation to the internet of distributed ledger technology networks. That's another key thing. providing better security, which will coexist with internet networks. And the reason why I feel there's so much significance on that is because if you have the right amount of security in someone, that in itself is probably one of the most important layers of what? Utility going forward. I mean, look at all the flaws that we've seen, for instance, in the past with security. I mean, obviously ALBT and some of these other ones of the past. Just a couple more ones before we get more into this. We see a future with networks such as the larger current internet networks of today, transacting data and formative value. SATP, like we're talking about earlier, will be a core infrastructure in regards to internet routers operating like BGP today. Again, think about your router in itself, like your physical router, right, that you have connected to your cable modem. I mean, I'm looking at, for instance, like some of the old technology I had before we had a cable modem of DOS's 3 modems and stuff like that, or the evolution of old routers compared to what we have now. SATP will solve the following: discovery, first connecting DLT networks, both internal, external, permission, and permissionless, to discovery and identity or identify each other. Routing, the protocol will allow gateway to gateway interconnectivity and routing to standardize handshakes too. Like, some people don't understand what we were talking about in regards to this, but it's when you hear these terms handshakes, it just means just that. It's a virtual handshake. Basically send out a signal, and in order for something to communicate with that, you have what is referred to as a virtual handshake. It's making, as the saying goes, a connection. Just real quick, what do you think in regards to some of this? I mean, do you think that this is overstated? Do you feel like it's not that big of a deal? Or do you feel as though that SATP and this whole thing with IETF is pretty huge for Quant? Because I think it is.
Well, as you were mentioning, all those other protocols from before that are now, widely adopted, they're just the standard. They all went through the IETP, and they go through a process what they call RFCs, which is a request for comment. So they send these out, and it goes out to engineers and programmers and a large website, not owners but builders, and they are able to comment and give recommendations on, like, SATP. They would send that protocol out there and say, hey, this is what we're working on. This is what it's going to do. What do you guys think? Essentially, right? That's kind of a general overview of what they do. But that's how important it is, because for this SATP to become just the standard of the way things are done in the future with blockchain to blockchain or enterprise to enterprise is going to be huge, right? That's going to set Quant up as a legacy type, information mover, going forward. And that can't be overstated, I don't think.
No, it can't be. I mean, that's the way I look at it. I mean, and Gilbert has even mentioned countless times, it's not that, you need to know, the physical name. Like, for instance, some people say, well, I want to see that, it actually says Quant behind this. It's like, well, in reality, think of all the things that had utility. For instance, we use this particular example of like plumbing, right? So it's like, that the plumbing works. Do you actually need to know every single part that's part of that plumbing, the name and manufacturer of the parts plan, or who distributed it and so on? All you need to know is that it's all together and it's all working. That's the key takeaway, right?
Yeah, you do the same thing for almost anything in your life, right? And
right.
we dig into it because we enjoy this stuff, right? Think of your car. You get in your car, you turn the key, it works. You're not concerned about who made what the alternator in there, or who makes the belts that are turning the
exactly.
the fan wheels. So it gets in there, works. If you're a mechanic, yeah, you're going to be more into that. You're going to know a lot of parts in your car and how it works. But 99% of the people out there don't care. They just want to turn the key and have it start. And just like in this financial future that we're working towards, people are just going to use it not knowing what runs it, right? I use the term plumbing, right? It's the plumbing of the financial future or the financial system going forward, and most people aren't going to care. They just know it works, and it works quickly, and it works less expensive than it used to. That's what people care about.
And more efficiently. I think that's
more efficiently. Absolutely. Yeah.
Just a little bit more in regards to this guy. So, it states transacting, then establish transactions across networks in a secure manner with the appropriate controls, integrity, and access checks. It's like you need to be able to, dot the I's, cross the T's, and make sure that everything is, secure. There's a little bit more in regards to this. Why do we put so much emphasis on this whole thing of SATP? Well, look, we'll solve the following. Discovery. First, connect DLT networks, for instance, internal, external, permission/permissionless, to discovery and identify each other. The routing, the protocol allow gateway to gateway interconnectivity and routing to standardized handshakes, like we were just talking about, to establish that connection. Transacting, then establish transactions across networks in a secure manner with the appropriate controls, integrity, and access checks, making sure everything, is where it should be and why that's significant. Now, there's this right here. It says, I'm very much looking forward to working on SATP and seeing how the industry will implement SATP in their products and networks. There's, of course, this, recent draft. That particular one is a lot of info. You will not be able to get that done on this particular show, but a little bit more that I want to show with you guys is this right here. And like it states, shout out to Greg Lunt, and that is Overledger is an API to value transfer. Crop that, stamp that, retweet that. I am, because I want people to understand this is where Quant really, really stands out. I mean, they stand out, period. But for those who want to flood or overlook this whole thing of APIs, I think you're doing a disservice to yourself. So listen to this. Overledger is an API to value transfer. Value transfer is an API to humans. Wow, very well stated. This comes from Lex Freeman. A lot of you guys already follow this guy. You already know who he is. He's been featured all over the place, right? He interviews big name people. I just saw him recently on the Joe Rogan Experience. So listen to what he states. Humans are an API to ChatGPT. ChatGPT is an API to Python, right? That particular programming language. Shout out to Cool Cat Crypto, I guess, who knows some of this stuff. Python is an API to C. C is an API to assembly. Assembly is an API to binary. Binary is an API to physics. Physics is an API to the machine that runs the universe. It's computation all the way down. That's pretty powerful stuff, to say the least, right? And I thought that was pretty impressive. And that is, shout out to Frankie. He watches us. He had a question for Greg, and that was, do you have a post to know the key dates this year for Quant's projects, launches, and so on? It's a good question. One more before we kick it back in. I want people to have more of an understanding real quick about this whole thing with IETF and why it matters so much. Here's some of the particular work that they have accomplished or done. So it says new work in the IETF begins with one or more participants producing a document called the Internet Draft, which is called I-D, and then working to get that I-D adopted for further work. Anyone can write an Internet Draft on any topic they believe is relevant to the IETF. There are different routes, though, which you see right here, that need to be adopted or worked on to eventually become an RFC. The vast majority of IETF's work is done in many different ways. There's working groups, and the WG basically has its own mailing list with most of its interaction and all of its official work conducted via email. A WG also has charter that states the scope of discussion for the WG and its goals. The WG mailing list and WG meetings are expected to focus only on what is the charter. The WG is headed by one or two, occasionally three W chairs, but the key thing is they have these meetings quite often on what to work on to get things moving in the right direction. And the whole idea that you have, for instance, Gilbert Verdian of Quant, Martin Hargreaves, and some of these other guys part of this particular panel is absolutely huge, because these guys at the IETF have literally been the brainchilds, if you will, the founding fathers, the pioneers of the internet, from Web 1 to Web 3 and even out to Web 4 in the future. I think it's very, very powerful for Quant moving forward. And I'm really, really that much more excited, because now it's like It's a lot more than just the plumbing at this point. It's literally all of the plumbing everywhere, you name it. Very, very impressive. It's going to get your reaction to some of this. I mean, some of these meetings, and then we'll kick it back in the comments. And then, if anything, we have a little bit more in regards to some of our hot topics tonight. But before we close out this particular segment, what do you think in regards to just the whole idea that they have a say in regards to proposals with the IETF?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was saying before. The IETF, so they hold 3 different meetings a year, and they hold them on different continents normally, right? They're not all in the same place. So they include upwards of 7,000 people a year that get together and get to discuss. Right, these are week-long meetings, right? So this obviously is serious, and then they can get together and they can talk about all those RFCs, all the comments, and all the recommendations that they get, kind of hash it out. And see where it goes. And then they can make their own recommendations for how you should proceed in dealing with the internet, obviously, because their entire job is to just make the internet better, right? If you want to boil it down, safer, faster. Like, how can they work on implementing, Web3, at a more efficient level? So that's really what they're doing. I think you highlighted that very well, the importance for this. And I'm sure there are some people on that task force that have been on there for decades. Right, so they are highly skilled, they're highly knowledgeable, they're intimately known throughout the internet task force, and anybody who interacts with it. It's kind of, if you don't know about it, I mean, you never heard about it, it makes you wonder. Like, okay, now I can kind of see, right, how does the entire world deal with the internet all together at the same time? Well, they have to go through central authorities, not an authority really, but a central place like the IETF to help gain standards, right? Because you have to have that. You can't just have everybody just doing whatever they want. It doesn't work that way, right? That everything has to connect. So, I mean, they've done a great job. I don't know what they could do better. I'm not technical like that on building internet. So, I got no complaints from from my perspective.
Well, the way I look at it, I mean, it's just as Larry would say, it behooves me to see people flood Quant, because it's like, you don't understand the IETF. I mean, that is not something that just was formed yesterday. I mean, when I see something like literally dating back to 1986, I was 5 years old in 1986. This dates back to the Reagan administration, everybody. And the way I look at it is, that is powerful in itself. I mean, you think that the IETF is really just going to pick anyone and everyone? No, they're going to, I guess you could say, is more than just doing their own research, and see that Quant connection. That in itself, like, even if I didn't know anything about Quant, that would be good enough for me personally. I'm just going to throw that out there. That I just thought that was super impressive. Shout out to Greg LUNC. He did a very, very good job with his outline. If you guys want to learn a little bit more in regards to, the nitty gritty, the deep dives, by all means, follow Greg LUNC, because he's killing it with the research.
Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you have not yet subscribed, do yourself a favor and subscribe for more information on the ISO 222 compliant tokens, and hit the notification bell to make sure that you are aware of the new videos when they come up. Max and I cover these ISOs, and we also have a live show every single night at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Make sure you tune in for that. You won't want to miss it. Thanks again, and we will see you on the next video.